The hunt for Planet X is nothing new. In fact, scientists thought Pluto was Planet X to explain the gravitational anomalies in our solar system. Many scientists now believe that our solar system, like most solar systems in the universe, is binary, having two suns. Now, the Sumerians tell us that Nibiru takes 3,600 years to complete one orbit. How could it have such a long elliptical orbit? Well, it would explain it if it had to go around two suns to get back into our inner solar system. This would account for its 3,600-year orbit.
Our scientists have recently come aware of what they call extrasolar planets or traveling planets, brown dwarfs that are suns that are too small to really light but kind of smolder and emit their own light. Sometimes they're called wandering planets or wanderers. Most suns are binaries. Our sun is a binary. Our sun's twin never lit. It is a dark, dead sun in a fixed position in space, as our sun is a fixed position in space. This particular large planet, which travels and comes in over only every 3,657 years, is orbiting both the suns, where the rest of the planets in our solar system are orbiting only the one sun. That's why it comes into our solar system only every 3,657 years and is gone for a long time.
Regarding the question of whether there could be a 3,600-year orbit of a planet X or planet Nibiru or Wormwood or whatever you call it, is not that far-fetched. Comet Hale-Bopp, for example, had a 4,200-year period, and when it left our solar system, its orbit had been reduced to a 2,600-year period. So those are the time frames of near solar system objects that it's very common. It's not unusual.
The chief scientist of the IRAS satellite actually announced having found this planet December 30th, 1983. It was picked up by 6 dailies. It made the Washington Post. It's one of those daily newspapers that picked it up. Very quickly thereafter, they wanted to make sure people understood that it was a mistake, that they didn't actually see a planet. More than likely it was a fog of a distant galaxy or something. So what they intended on finding, they found, then announced, then realized what their announcement meant, and then decided to clamp down and keep their story quiet and would not discuss another planet in their solar system for quite some time.
If NASA did discover, or should I say rediscover, a 10th planet in our solar system, then why would they have the need to cover it up? I mean, this would be the biggest discovery of the century, and yet, if it is covered up, there must be some reason to withhold this information from the public.
The concept of a planet X or a 10th planet is not exactly new. The possibility of this object coming in and devastating our inner solar system is something mainstream astronomers certainly don't want to talk about. When the ancient Greeks went back to Egypt, they asked the Egyptian priest cults what was civilization like a long time ago, and they said that in the previous 10,000 years they had major devastating events. These were the type that crushed their civilization. Not wars, not pestilence, but dramatic physical events that literally crushed their civilization back into the cave ages. And we see the devastation in cities in South America, ancient cities, that are now being discovered, which were obviously destroyed by massive earthquake-type situations. Earth definitely, without question, has had major earth changes that have destroyed entire civilizations, and the indication is that it was not that long ago. The concept of a pole shift, in other words, the Earth moving its either magnetic or physical pole, has come up many times when we hear people talking about Planet X. My own papers, which were published in 1979, deal with a very subtle property of the Earth, and that is that the mantle of the Earth is not connected physically, as in one solid rock type of structure, with the inner core. In fact, there's a very viscous layer in there, and if a large object comes by Earth within close proximity, it would set up basically a tidal wave in the mantle, and we could see very easily that this would cause a shift of land masses. Now, this wouldn't be a nice smooth gyration. This would be a pulse coming through the surface of the Earth at thousands of miles an hour. Mountain ranges would form, oceans would form huge tides, and this would not be something you'd want to face in everyday life. It would be a very violent event.
What causes a pole shift? It's very simple if you think of a couple of magnets, and when you played with them as a child and you lined them up end to end, North Pole to South Pole, and they snap together, and they just want to line up that way. If you have a couple of planets with a strong magnetized core passing each other in space, the larger one is going to cause the smaller one to move, just as a child, when you put magnets on a table, you found that when you pushed one toward another, you could cause motion, you know, almost like magic. So if the larger planet comes from the south, North Pole to the Earth's South Pole, at first everything is pretty much lined up. There might be a little tugging and confusion, but as the larger one passes the smaller one being Earth, it will actually grip its south pole and tip it as it passes. So this is what causes pole shifts. The only time you have such a thing happening to a planet is if you have two planets highly magnetized passing in close proximity to each other.
This makes sense. If our little moon, that's only 1/4 the size of Earth, has such an impact, gravitational influence on Earth, affecting our tides, affecting earthquakes, imagine what something 23 times the mass of Earth, 4 to 5 times its size, could do to us.
There's every indication that about 4,000 years ago, the South Pole and the North Pole moved. The North Pole, I believe, was in somewhere north of the state of Wisconsin, and the South Pole was out in the Pacific Ocean. And scientists know pretty much for a fact by direct measurement that the ice cap on Antarctica is no more than 4,000 years old, and in fact Antarctica prior to that was occupied. It was actually had animals and, I believe, human civilization. Siberia was a tropical climate 4,000 years ago with mammoths. If you saw the one they dug out of the Siberian tundra, this was a tropical animal that was quick frozen in the tundra with tropical plants frozen in its throat, undigested.
Our Earth gives evidence that we have had periodic pole shifts. There's mountain building in and of itself is evidence. These mountains are like pushed together. If you're in an airplane and you look down at foothills, for instance, it almost looks like a rumpled blanket, like somebody took a blanket and pushed it and rumpled it. Mountains are forced upwards with great masses of rocks snapping. This is signs of great pressure, not the gentle squeezing and pushing that happens with earthquakes at all. Indeed, our Earth has had these periodic pole shifts. You can see that in the evidence of the Earth. Go back every time period and you can see other changes. The ripping apart of the continents is one evidence of this. What will cause the continents to drift? Why would they drift? They're being ripped apart. If you have something violently in motion and then you slam it and stop it, this would cause the ripping and tearing and crumbling up of mountains that we see. During these passages, and when we have pole shifts and violent geological earthquakes and changes and the like, shifting of the tipping of the Earth and shifting of the crust, volcanoes explode. And when they do, there's a lot of molten lava pouring out. Well, lava, being molten, will line up with a current magnetic field. And when lava hardens, that's a permanent freeze, indicating the direction of magnetism at that moment in time. Well, this is one way that they have determined the wandering pole theory, where they've identified places in Earth where they say, at one time this appears to have been the North Pole, or that appeared to have been the South Pole, is through this frozen lava alignment. Along the Atlantic, land is stretched and pulled under the water. For instance, off of Japan, there's cities and roads that they find under the water. In Bermuda, we see roads and walls and the like. Likewise, land can rise. Atlantis is rumored to be a continent that went under the waves during one of these cataclysmic passages.
This brief documentary could not possibly contain all of the information we have on the ancient cities of South America. The city, for example, they just discovered 2,000 feet under the ocean off the shore of Cuba. The cities that have been found off of Asia and in the South China Sea that are submerged. And obviously very large, very sophisticated populations existed on this planet. And it is very easy to see that the populations that we saw, as for example when the Spanish came across, the Incas, the Maya, and the Aztecs, were very late comers, and they possibly were living around facilities that were built by previous civilizations. Much of this we don't know for sure, but one thing is clear. This earth was populated by very large civilizations that met a very violent destruction, and not that long ago, possibly in the 4,000 year ago range.
Various scientists have noticed these geological changes in the patterns in them. And what almost invariably happens is that the thought of our Earth being subjected to these kind of violent motions and is so frightening that people prefer not to think about it. It's like the cancer patient who doesn't want to know. And so it's put aside. Or else people put it in the context of like millions and millions of years ago, such and such happened. Well, in fact, it was 3,000 and 4,000 years ago that we had our last geological cataclysms. For instance, the oceans are 16 to 20 feet lower than they were approximately 3,500 years ago. All over the world, seashells are high on beaches, indicating the waterline was higher. What caused that water to drop? Where did it go? Didn't evaporate. Well, it was a pole shift, and it caused the rifts in the oceans to widen so that the water dropped down. Otherwise, what happened? So, yes, various people have investigated that. Velikovsky was one such scientist. He gathered scientific evidence that other people had put together and presented the pattern, and it was so frightening that he was vilified, no pun intended. And Zecharia Sitchin is another who has noted the ancient Sumerians were aware of a 3,600 year pattern and a passage of another planet outside of our solar system which would come through. The last passage was during the Jewish Exodus, approximately 3,600 years ago. Nobody knows for sure the exact date because during these passages, mankind is just discombobulated. They stop keeping records. Records are lost. So nobody can exactly pinpoint the date.
There is a pattern to the cataclysms on Earth. If we go back every 3,600 year period, we see that some major world catastrophe happened. If we go by the Earth's geology as evidence, the last passage of Planet X may have been 3,600 years ago. We have the formation of Niagara Falls, the Great Lakes, mass extinctions, and even by looking at analyzing tree rings, we see that 3,600 years ago, indeed, there was a worldwide cataclysm. Now, by doing the math, that would mean that Nibiru's next passage should be due now. And if it was inbound, there must be some signs of it approaching. Now, many scientists seem to say that the current Earth changes are due to global warming, man-made pollution, and this would make sense until we take account that There are other changes happening in the solar system. One such theory says that cow flatulence, believe it or not, is responsible for depleting our ozone layer, which leads to our polar caps melting. But what about Mars? What about Mars's polar caps? They seem to be melting as well. What about our sun? It's 2 years past its prime solar peak. There are many changes happening in the solar system. So what would be influencing our entire solar system as a whole, not just Earth?
You're told global warming is the problem. If hot air is the problem, then why is our Earth heating from the bottom up? The deep ocean rifts are the ones that are heating. Volcanism in Indonesia, the undersea volcanoes, is what causes El Nino and the like. It's what causes the weather irregularities. Increased volcano activity, how can that be because of global warming? You're told about sun cycles and the like. This is an 11-year cycle. The 11-year cycle ended in the year 2000. Now we're told it's supposed to end in the year 2003. For some reason, we're going to have a 14-year cycle. This is not the truth. This is disinformation. You really need to look at what's happening, the weather irregularities, the changes in the Earth, and think of it in terms of these periodic passages and make up your own mind.
You don't have to have a collision for something to affect us. It can affect us at a distance. It could be on the other side of the sun, have a very large discharge into the sun. The sun could erupt with a full coronal discharge, which means it would come off in all directions from the sun, and we would be very affected. Our weather would be very affected, and this new object, Planet X or whatever you would call it, would be very far away from Earth. So the thing I want to stress is that you do not need a direct collision with something to be affected.